Right. Okay. Let's move on with this theme, which is the last segment in the first section of our course. The first section in our course, which is titled Preliminaries Beyond the Hermeneutics of Suspicion. That's the section heading. Then we looked at the terms clarifying the rationale of the course. Then we looked at paradigms and epistemologies of research, reframing the standard picture. And now we are exploring context of theory and theorizing. Okay. The problem that this set of lectures relate to is set up by this preliminary discussion offered by Richard Swedberg, and where he's arguing for taking the process of theorizing as seriously as we do the final product, namely theory, and that taking the process of theorizing seriously implies taking what he calls the context of discovery very seriously, and then I pointed out that there is a history to that label, context of discovery, and in the philosophy of science, that label is juxtaposed against the context of justification. And I addressed that in the last class, and then pointed out that that there are other ways of exploring the context of theory and theorizing, quite independent of the context of discovery, context of justification distinction, as indeed the problem set up by what's his name? The problem set up by, this lapses, you'll have to pardon my momentary lapses of memory, Richard Swedberg, and I actually initiated this alternative discussion on the context of theory and theorizing by invoking three features of what, for the purposes of our lecture, one is terming the traditional scientific view of theory and theorizing, right? And I've initiated that setup, etc. And I want to now move in further in this class, right? And this is the background to what I'm going to set up in today's class, and what I'm going to do in this class is to look at two sets of responses to this traditional scientific view of theory and theorizing, as articulated through those three features, right? And please note the response on both. Both the responses are critical of this traditional scientific view of theory and theorizing. But before I move into the responses, I think it's important to make one critical remark or an observation, a passing observation, but which is an important thing, that the three features that we outlined as part of the traditional scientific view of theory and theorizing, namely theory as distinct from practice, theories yield explanations / predictions, and theories can be judged as true or false. The test of bivalence, etc. You can clearly see that each of the features which are part of the traditional conception of theory and theorizing relate more to the context of justification than to the context of discovery, right? Etc. Right? And I think it's important to note that even as we are setting up a different context of discussion, there is a sense in which this new context of discussion that we are setting up can still be appropriated from within that earlier conception of the context of discovery versus the context of justification. So each of the elements that we saw as comprising the traditional scientific conception or view of theory and theorizing refers more to the context of justification than to the context of discovery. And consequently, because the focus in those features is the context of justification and not the context of discovery, you can clearly see that each of the features of the traditional scientific conception of theory and theorizing, tend to exclude the dimension of time and space, historical time and geographical space as factors in the underpinning theory. And I think in the critical observations that will follow, this point will find more fuller articulation, that the traditional scientific conception of theory and theorizing tends to ignore the dimension of time and space as factors that bear on theory and the process of theorizing. Right now, having made those observations, let me move into the responses. And for purposes of our discussion, I'm isolating two distinct sets of responses. Right, one response, is one, and which is a distinct response. Okay, and often coming from within social science. Okay, is to outrightly reject the traditional scientific view of theory and theorizing, and say that it is highly inappropriate for social sciences. Right, that if you have to discuss theory and theorizing in the social sciences, then the traditional scientific conception of theory and theorizing will not do the work for us. Right. So in other words, the argument is for a different account of theory and theorizing and the role of theory in social scientific knowledge and so on. That's one response, and I will speak about it as we go along. Right, but I think there is another response, and for me, a much more interesting one, for reasons which I will clarify as we go along. Another response is to challenge the received idea of theory and theorizing, the received traditional conception, by arguing that not all theory within science ignores the historical dimension of time and space. Right, of temporality and so on. And I think this latter response is for me an interesting one, although the first response, the direct response, outrightly rejecting the traditional scientific conception of theory and theorizing, is on expected lines insofar as social science is concerned. So I'm going to start with the latter conception, right? The latter response, namely, which challenges the traditional scientific view of theory and theorizing, and challenges it on the ground that not all theory, to which we fit the label scientific, ignores the historical dimension of time or temporality. Right. So I will begin by exploring this response, and I will look at one situation of science, namely evolutionary biology, right, and the place of theory in evolutionary biology, to make this argument. Right. Of course, I'm not going into the details of this history of science, because I mean, to be able to be a historian of science is to also not just look with an idea of science, but work through particular sciences and try to read a history of those particular sciences into the idea of science. And that's a extremely interesting task. And it's something that I do as part of some of my work, but I'm not going to go into the details of this of the history that I'm going to invoke for us. I'm only looking at one response to the traditional scientific conception of theory and theorizing, which argues that that conception cannot be generalized for all the sciences, because a lot of theorizing within the sciences does not necessarily ignore the historical dimension of time and temporality. But in its classical conception, the traditional scientific view of theory and theorizing ignores the factor of time and space in underpinning theory, right? So you can see that the two responses are important, and for me, while the first direct response, rejecting the scientific conception of theory and theorizing, is not unexpected or is along familiar lines, I think it's the latter response which actually nuances our idea of science and so on. So let me look at at one situation of science and theorizing in that situation of science, namely evolutionary biology. And please note, I'm being selective here in taking up this example or this situation or this particular practice of science. Right now, in the history of evolutionary biology, right? The handout it gives you some sense of that. You find that Charles Darwin, The Origin of Species, which was published in 1859, has had a great influence on our understanding of the biological world. Okay, and in your course on classical sociological theory, you would definitely have recognized that many of the 19th century pioneers of sociology, were also greatly influenced by Darwinism. In fact, Marx actually wanted to dedicate one of his books to Darwin, right? Especially a work which he was contemplating, which he never got down to doing, namely the pre-capitalist world, right? The world, the transition, the world prior to capitalism, and the larger trajectories of the pre-capitalist world, and so on, etc. So Darwin's work in the mid-19th century was greatly influential, not just in the study and understanding of the world of biology and of organic life, but also influenced a lot of disciplines outside of the sciences, including the humanities and social sciences as well. Right now, broadly, and I'm speaking very broadly, Darwin's evolutionary theory, right? Provided an account of the origins of the universe, of life, of the origins of life, not of the universe, of life. That in a manner of speaking, challenged creationism, right? And what we mean by creationism here is that the world and all forms of life within it was created by God, right? Etc. Right? And challenge. Darwin was Darwin's theory, evolutionary theory, was among other things, was confronting this form of creationism and by providing an alternative account of the origins of life, as it were, right? Now, and what Darwin was saying is that, and again, I'm speaking very broadly, is that that all life on Earth, right, had evolved through a process of mutation, of change, right, and also of a process of natural selection. Okay, and the principle of natural selection meant that only those species which are capable of adapting to their environment, okay, or only those life forms which are capable of adjusting to their environment, okay, come to survive the mutations, and that there are definite transitions in this process of the evolution of life forms on the earth, right? Now, and I mean, this is broadly what the classical evolutionary theory in biology, as announced by Darwin, was seeking to do. Of course, there is more to it than just that. Okay, but nevertheless, for our purposes, this much is sufficient, right? Now, I mean, for many of us, particularly modern and contemporary people, this evolutionary form of explanation is somewhat much more convincing, right, and scientific, right? Okay. Although, of course, there is still a controversy that is always between evolution and creationism, right, etc. I mean, there are attempts to mediate between these two theories, evolutionist theories and creationist theories, and interesting mediations between the two as well, etc. But by and large, I think the evolutionary explanation offered about about life forms evolving through a process of mutation and through a process of selection, natural selection, implies is seen to hold some currency, right? Now the interesting question for us is, why do we think that the evolutionary explanation, right, is more convincing and some scientific than, say, the creationist explanation, right? What are the grounds on which we prefer one theory over the other, right? And I think that's the question to be asking, and you can give various answers to the question. One might say, for instance, that our preferred theory, in this case evolutionary biology, or the evolutionary theory, fits the empirical evidence better, right? It's true because it accounts for the facts of the situation better, right? Etc. So the test of bivalence is brought in, and people might argue that one prefers the evolutionary theory because it fits the facts better, the empirical evidence better, right? Now, but interestingly, the problem which concerns the philosopher of science or the historian, the philosopher and historian of science, is a different question, right? I mean, it's not only the question of whether the theory is commensurate with the facts, with the evidence. I think the historian of science, and particularly a historian of science with a more philosophical bent of mind, is asking a different, is addressing a different question, namely, in judging between theories, between competing theories, the empirical data, right, or evidence may often be insufficient, to determine which of the contesting theories should be accepted as true, right, etc. So, I mean, on the face of it, you can say that the evolutionary theory fits the facts better, right? The facts of life forms better, right? The available scientific evidence about life forms better. But then one can always ask whether this evidence is sufficient, right, to establish the credentials of that theory, right? etc. So the historian of science, particularly that with a philosophical bent of mind, may always keep asking this question, that in judging between different competing theories, okay, whether it is sufficient, okay, to accept those theories as true, okay, which fit with the facts better, right? In fact, in the philosophy of science, this is termed as the underdetermination thesis, right? That theories are underdetermined by facts, right? It's one thing to say that theories are determined by facts. It's quite another to say that theories are underdetermined by facts, right? I mean, when you say underdetermined, that means yes, theories relate to facts. Theories are about trying to explain facts, right? But the facts themselves, can be encountered through different theories, right? Not only that, the facts may not be enough, okay, to either validate or invalidate a theory, right? Etc. So there is more to theory than just its ability to account for a domain of facts, right? Etc. So I mean, this is the question which I think is an important question, and we need to take this into mind, right? In fact, as philosophers of science have pointed out, right, the relationship between theory and evidence, and particularly observational evidence, right, okay, is particularly problematic, okay, because especially if there are theories that take context seriously, right? Okay, I mean, so especially for theories which are context determined, as it were, it becomes even more difficult, right, to seek a one-to-one correspondence between theories and facts, right, etc. That's why it is held that in the context of evolutionary biology, right, or classical evolutionary biology, or classical evolutionary theory in biology, does work with a conception of time and space. Okay, and it works with the conception of time as a process of constant change, right? I mean, a process as mutation and a process of adaptation, right? And that it takes place. This process is taking place in specific contexts, in specific context of the environment, right? Space. As it were, right? So you find that that classical evolutionary theory in biology, right, does embrace a conception of time, right, as process, as a process of adaptation, particularly of adaptation, and space as a general container, a kind of a setting or a surrounding. Or in evolutionary theory, it's called a niche, an ecological niche, right, in which things take place, and so on, right? So, in fact, for evolutionary theory in biology, everything changes or evolves, right? Okay, okay, and although it is not strictly context, as time and space, which is constitutive of the mechanisms of change, right? But there is a time and space within which change happens, right? But the mechanics of that change could be explained through certain kinds of organic processes and so on, right? For instance, the process of natural selection. One can always ask this question: where does this principle, this mechanism of natural selection come in? Right? How does it kick off? I mean, is it something more organic, or is it something which is willed? Right? And in the traditional, in the classical evolutionary theory, there is something organic and given about the process of natural selection, and so on, right? Etc. So clearly, you can see that the if you take the case of evolutionary biology and the classical evolutionary theory in biology, you will find that the traditional scientific conception of theory and theorizing, as we set it up in the last class, does not hold good at all, right? Etc. Okay. Of course, there are branches, or theories in certain branches of interdisciplinary biology that, in fact, work with a fuller idea of context and so on. I mean, okay, okay, and in fact, they are interested. I mean, there are certain branches of biology which are interested in explaining, how certain universal processes, right, of, say, for instance, processes of natural selection play out in different contexts, right, etc. Right. For instance, a lot of climate sciences, a lot of earth sciences, okay, are interested in this question of how certain universal processes of change, right, get modified and contextually determined in different locales, etc. Right. And in fact, questions of scale become very, very crucial in these in the climate sciences and in the earth sciences and so on. Earth sciences, I mean, essentially geology and sister disciplines in geology, etc. Right? Okay. Now, so in other words, while science is seen to have a universalizing imperative, it's nevertheless argued that this universalizing imperative does not play itself out in the same way in different locations, right? So, and that any science which is addressing these universal processes must also be attentive, will also be attentive, and particular sciences are there for that purpose, who will be attentive to the modifications in these universal processes that are going on. Please note, we are talking about the natural world here, right? I mean, we are not talking of the social world where a notion of context is always already given. We are talking of the non-social or the natural world, including physical and so on, which do have a certain dynamism built into them, which I think a lot of the sciences are seeking to address, or particular sciences are seeking to address. Unfortunately, in our ideas of science, on our general notions of science, we don't implicate these particular practices of the individual sciences into account. And I think it's important that we in fabricating some idea of a universal science or an universal idea of science, also work with the variations implied by different ranges of scientific practice and the practice of particular sciences and so on, right? All the same, I mean, notwithstanding what I have already said, I think it's important to grant that the universalizing imperative of science is some kind of a normative ideal for our conception of science, right? That, in other words, it's always argued that the aim of science, is to produce. The aim is within science is to produce methodologies that are facilitative of explanations or representations across all spatial and temporal orderings, right, etc. So notwithstanding the fact that processes, universal processes in nature, can still undergo some modifications and transformations in particular locations, etc. Nevertheless, science holds on to the universalizing imperative as part of its normative ideal. I'm stressing this point because if you look at sociological theory after 1945 and you look at those instituting moments of the 1930s and the 40s, particularly when the locus of sociological theory is shifting from Europe to America, right? And in the American context, it is Parsons and Merton who are setting up a new agenda for sociological theory, Parsons particularly. One of the claims of Parsons is the idea of a general theory, right? And, you know, in defending the idea of a general theory for sociology, his justification is that all existing theories in sociology are time specific and space specific, right? And they're not general, right? So he sets up an ideal for sociological theory coming from from a critique of existing theories in sociology being time specific and space specific, and that if we have to have theory in sociology, then it should be independent of space and context, right? Etc. In fact, his idea of a general theory is a theory which is applicable here, there, everywhere, yesterday, today, tomorrow, and so on, right? Of course, that may have been a very grand ambition, right? And C. Wright Mills actually tried to interrogate that ambition. I mean, in fact, dubbed it as grand theory, right? And grand only in name, okay? But the ambition is something that we need to recognize. So this universalizing imperative as a normative ideal for science is still there, notwithstanding the fact that in the particular practice of the sciences, you do have determinations of context coming in particular kinds of ways, right? Now, and I think this discussion, that's why for me this discussion is a little more interesting because it tells us that this traditional scientific conception of theory and theorizing is actually a caricature, right? I mean, it does account for certain facets of scientific practice, but it does not account for the fullness of scientific practice, right? And that if we have to account for the fullness of scientific practice, then somewhere, there will have to be a certain mix of the context of justification and the context of discovery coming in, and so on, right? So questions of context can be a factor as much for science as it is for other kinds of disciplines and so on. Now, but before I move ahead and I move into the other response, which is, I think, not a very surprising response. It is a conventional and a response that all of us would bring. That the traditional scientific conception of theory is hopelessly inadequate in trying to look at theory and theorizing in the sciences. In fact, our discussion now has set up that the traditional scientific conception of theory and theorizing, is not entirely representative of even all the sciences, right? And that there are particular practice of the sciences which, in a sense, require that those three features that have been outlined will have to get modified and so on. Any initial queries at this point, or should I move ahead? Any immediate clarifications for the moment? Okay. So I think we can have a more substantial discussion towards the end of the class when I kind of completed the lecture. Let me now go into the more direct response, right? Okay, and the next two slides, in your PPT cover that space, right? And what is that response? Which outrightly rejects the traditional scientific conception of theory and theorizing, and particularly arguing that it is highly inappropriate for the social sciences, okay, and that the social sciences must build on and take into account a different conception of theory and theorizing in social scientific knowledge and practice, right? So let's look at this other response, although, as I said, this response is going to follow more or less a pattern which I think all of you are acquainted with. Now, for me, as I said, for me, it's actually the particular practice of the sciences which is important, right? I mean, more than the idea of science that we work with, the particular practice of sciences, and the sciences are plural. There are different kinds of sciences, including the humanities and the social sciences, etc. And I think somewhere along the way, we need a more productive discussion between and across the varieties of the practice of the sciences and so on, right? Okay, but let me stay with the response from social science, right? And okay, now I mean, the argument here goes, I mean, it takes many forms, and I'm only privileging some dominant forms in which this direct response to the traditional scientific conception, particularly from within social science, is articulated. Now, the argument goes something like this, that any social theory, right, is addressing both aspects of the social world, okay, and also the mechanisms of change and order within the social world. So the object of any social theory, right, is to articulate the basic components of the social world and also get at and address the mechanisms of social order and social change in the social world, right? And you of course, you have different theories claiming different aspects of the social world and positing different mechanisms of order and change, etc. Okay, and you can have, I mean, the Marxian theory, social theory will look at the world in one kind of a way. The Durkheimian social theory will look at the social world in another kind of a way. There are certain parallels that you can draw between the Marxian and the Durkheimian one, but a consistently non-Marxist articulation comes in Weber's sociology, and so on. So you can have different social theories of the world, and then you can also have alternative theories which argue that this classical corpus represented by Marx, Weber, and Durkheim are not sufficiently robust, that we need to supplement it with more micro-level orientations. So for you look at somebody like Simmel, or you look at somebody like Erving Goffman in a more contemporary context, or symbolic interactionism, and so on. I mean, you can have different theories which address different facets of the social world, and so on, right? The fact that there are multiple theories about the social world, multiple disclosures of the mechanisms of change and order within the social world, it is important to see how one set of theoretical ideas connects up with and generates other ideas, right? And that how, for instance, a certain synthesis of Marx and Durkheim can bring up new orientations to the world, or straddling the domain of Marx and say Weber can reorient our understanding of the world, and so on, right? So the multiplicity of social theories about the world also necessitates the demand to look at the dialogue and conversation between and across theories, and how this conversation between and across theories can generate either ideas and new ways of seeing the world, and so on, right? I mean, I can, and what I do in the handout is to illustrate this with the classical heritage of sociology, and within the classical heritage of sociology, look at Marx's ideas about the social world, which is often represented as historical materialism, and you will find that historical materialism, or Marx's views about the structure of society as represented in historical materialism has definitely influenced a lot of theoretical thinking across the social sciences, and also continues to be developed by theorists across the disciplines, right? And so there are Marxists conversing with other Marxists, and there are also attempts to open out new channels of communication between Marxist and non-Marxist perspectives, and so on, right? Okay. Now, but if you look at the original theory, right, Marx's historical materialism, right? Although I think there are nuances there. I mean, Marx never projected historical materialism. In fact, I mean, the word historical materialism many times figures as a description in his account, and it is only in a few places where he actually speaks about historical materialism as a distinctive theory of society and so on. But these are nuances of exegetical interpretation. But you will find that either descriptively or programmatically, historical materialism in Marx obeys certain kinds of impulses which are central to any social theory, namely to address what are the components of the social world and what are the mechanisms that make for order and change in that world, right? And in fashioning this vocabulary, Marx was addressing as much perspectives in German idealism as he was exploring attitudes in forms of materialism and so on, right? Etc. And so I think there are many ways in which we can think about historical materialism, and somebody might argue that historical materialism, while it claims to be a total view of the social world, is working off society and economy, and loses the focus on ideas and culture, and that we need to bring that focus in, right? And that's why there are people who have tried to bring a certain harmony between Marx, historical materialism of Marx, and a certain kind of cultural determinism that comes from, say, Weber's work, right? In fact, whenever I teach Weber, I spend a lot of time trying to think about the dialogue between Marx and Weber, etc. And I mean, when Weber is actively pursuing his themes, Marx is no longer alive, right? But somewhere Weber is inheriting a lot of Marxian ideas and then modifying and trying to articulate an emphasis. Okay, so I mean, it's interesting to see whether Weberian social theory can forge a certain kind of an encounter with Marxian social theory, right, etc. And what are the axes on which this encounter between the two can be articulated? Weber himself, right, believed that Marx is an intellectual giant, right? I mean, he believed that there were two intellectual giants for him. One was Marx, and the other was Nietzsche. Right, and that somewhere along the way, what Weber was disputing was not Marx per se, but a certain practice of Marxism that was represented in the Second International, and so on. Right. Okay. Now, that's why you have. I mean, that's why this criticism, of Marx's theory that it is deterministic. That it ignores the significance of the intentional dimension of human action in shaping the social world, is at one level hurled against Marx, but you will find that there are ways in which a certain reconsideration of the grounds of Marx's historical materialism can be forged. Okay, in fact, I mean, I'm only speaking of the encounter between Marxian social theory and Weberian social theory, but Marxian social theory itself has tried to address this criticism, right? I mean, so you don't need to go outside of Marx to open out the space of historical materialism. Marxists themselves have sought to revise Marxism. I mean, you look at neo-Marxist theories coming from Lukács, coming from Gramsci, Althusser, and others. You will find that there is an opening out to elements of structure and elements of agency in equal measure. Okay. Now, of course, I mean, if you're looking at this disputation between different theories within social theory, etc., I think while that disputation between and across theories is interesting, I think more than the criticisms that are offered from one theory about the other, I think what should interest us in this play of theories is in this contestation between different theories, is there something about the social world which is distinctive, right? And that there is something about the social world which is so distinctive, okay, that it makes the traditional scientific conception of theory and theorizing inappropriate or inadmissible, right, etc. So even as we recognize that the situation of theory and theorizing in the social sciences, and particularly in social theory, is different, I think there is also a larger substantive question about whether there is something distinctive about the social world which makes the traditional scientific conception of theory and theorizing inappropriate, and so on, right? Now, I mean, in fact, you should ask this question whether the test of bivalence, right, which is one crucial element of the traditional scientific conception of theory and theorizing, that theories are either true or false, etc. And theories are always tested against facts, and facts establish whether theories are true or false. I mean, that test of bivalence, one can ask, is that possible and suggestive? I mean, is that test of bivalence appropriate for social scientific knowledge, etc. One can even ask this question whether the test of falsification that Popper spoke about, and Popper had spoken of falsification as the criterion of science. I mean, that the test of science is not the confirmation of a theory, but its falsification. So you keep testing theories so as to disprove them, and in the process of testing theories so as to disprove them, you may keep proving them to be true, etc. But the fact is, you're actually trying always to falsify a theory, etc. One can ask whether falsification as the criterion of science, which Popper believed, where a single can repudiate a theory, right? A single counter observation can repudiate a theory. Is it applicable to the sciences? In fact, one can ask whether that's applicable even to the science. Is it applicable to the social sciences? And you can ask whether it's applicable also to the sciences, because there are a lot of theories in science which are not, observation confirmed, right? I mean, there are theories which are taken as credible and important, independent of their empirical confirmation, right? I mean, look at the Higgs boson. The Higgs boson theory in science got its empirical confirmation only in recent times, whereas that the physical world has particles of the kind that the Higgs boson spoke about is something that the theory was postulating even prior to its empirical confirmation, right? But I mean, that's a separate question. We are looking at the social sciences. I mean, is the test of bivalence implied in social science knowledge? Does Popper's theory of falsification as the criterion of science, apply to the social sciences? I mean, these are questions which you can keep asking, and you will find that you will have to modify the traditional scientific conception of theory and theorizing if you have to accommodate, right, not just the variety of the practice of the sciences, but the specificity of the social sciences, right, etc. Okay, now and let me build this idea a little further. Can we have a theory which can explain all the facts in its domain, right? The fact that a theory does not explain, I mean, there are certain facts which are counter to a theory. Does it invalidate a theory? I mean, you can keep asking these questions, and you will clearly point out that not only are theories underdetermined by facts, right? Theories themselves are never observation neutral, right? Etc. I mean, in fact, within the social sciences, it is important to recognize, right, that more than one theoretical construction can be placed on the evidence, right, etc. Okay, and why particular judgments or evaluations come out of the evidence will depend upon the kind of ideological and theoretical frameworks from which you are seeing, and so on, right? In fact, a lot of social science and a lot of social scientific theories often invariably invoke unobservable entities, right? The idea of social structure, okay, that structures determine things, right? Or the idea of classes, right? Market forces, etc. I mean, these are all unobservable entities, okay, but they are there, which are conditioning human behavior in particular kinds of ways, and so on. And the evidence for these unobservable entities is actually very indirect, etc. Right? So somewhere along the way, in this second response, which is wholly arguing that the traditional scientific conception of theory and theorizing is wholly inappropriate, you can clearly see that there is an emphasis on the fact that societies are essentially open dynamical systems, right? I mean, there may be something systemic about society, right? There is something systemic about society, but this systematicity of the social can also incorporate a lot of dynamical principles and so on. And incidentally, this is a point which is also emphasized in a lot of the complexity sciences of complexity, and so on, right? So this is one that theories, particularly in the social sciences, are underdetermined by facts, and that theories in social sciences often invoke unobservable entities, and furthermore, and I'm outlining something further, that theories in the social sciences also can become self-referential, right? I mean, because most of our observation, right, is theory laden. We look at the world from a particular point of view, right, etc. Right? I mean, seeing is always seeing as something, right, etc. Right? So given the theory laden character of observation, okay, that observation is not just a naive collection of facts, it's also seeing facts as such and such. etc. Theories in the social sciences also tend to become self-referential, right? Okay, now, okay, of course, this is again not unique to social science. Observational descriptions are not theory neutral in the natural sciences as well. In fact, Kuhn's idea of paradigms was precisely meant to articulate that view that most of the time you're working from within a certain framework and looking at the world through that framework, but the world may change, and that the framework may not be able to account for the world, but there is a moment when the world is so different that our frameworks are not able to account for it, in which case there is a need for a new paradigm, and so on, right? Okay, but the point is that the theory-laden character of observation, needs more nuanced representation in the context of the social sciences. I mean, scholars in the social sciences speak of a double hermeneutic in the social sciences, right? Okay, and what is a double hermeneutic? That the observer is very much a part of the observed, okay, and the observer is interpreting the observed, and the observer, as part of the observed, is also reinforcing the observed on himself, and so on. So there is a duality, a double hermeneutic involved, right? That the concepts in the social sciences often oscillate between lay concepts and scientific concepts, right? I mean, the concepts. I mean, the concepts of social science have as their reference point the concepts that actors have, people have, okay, and many times social scientific concepts have to heed. They have to engage with actors' concepts, okay, just as actors may also take into account social scientific concepts, and so on. I mean, there are many instances of this, in social practice, and so on, right? Okay, then, I mean, so what we are saying, what we are highlighting at this point in time throws up a very important issue, and an issue which comes up even more glaringly in the context of the social sciences, okay, that if empirical evidence cannot, decide on the validity of a theory, right, then what other grounds are there for preferring one theory to another, right? I mean, how do you explain theory preference and theory change in the social sciences, and so on, right? So if evidence cannot decide on the validity of a given social theory, then what are the other grounds in which people go about preferring one theory over another? And one response to this question comes from a perspective that I've already summarized for you broadly, critical realism, and you can actually look at the Andrew Sayer reading, etc. That the ground for holding on to a theory, right? The ground for holding on to a theory is not quite looking for observational validation, right? Or looking for observational evidence for validation. Rather, in holding on to a theory, you look for, conceptual coherence, adequacy, practical adequacy, what it enables you to do, how conceptually, logically, and conceptually coherent the theory is, and so on. So one response from within critical realism is to point out that the grounds for preferring one theory over another, especially in the domain of the social sciences, is to look for practical adequacy, what it enables you, what a theory enables you to do, what the conceptual coherence, and so on. Likewise, you have another response from feminism, and we will see later. There is a lot of particularly on reflections on science. I think there is a lot of extremely interesting feminist reflection on science, and a lot of interesting discussion in the philosophy and history of science actually have come from feminists. Okay, and I've cited a few names here like Donna Haraway or Sandra Harding or Helen Longino, etc. I mean, these are part of the feminist philosophy of science, as indeed more recently Karen Barrard and others, who formulate arguments for more embodied and situated conceptions of scientific knowledge, right, across the sciences, including social sciences and philosophy, right? So they ask for, I mean, there is a more embodied conception. There is a more situated conception of scientific knowledge across the social sciences and across the sciences as well, right? Okay, so to kind of conclude this lecture, where I'm looking at the responses to the traditional scientific view of theory and theorizing, okay, what I'm stressing is that theorizing on any register from within the sciences or across the sciences, the humanities and the social sciences, requires a capacity to grasp the connections in what is a fairly messy world of experience, right, etc. Right, and I think a lot of theorizing is essentially about connecting, as somebody put it, connecting the dots, as it were, right? I mean, connecting the dot, grasping the connections in a certain messy world of experience. In fact, as I'm always fond of repeating, a certain economy of involvement and detachment, right? Okay, is with the world or with any object is mandatory for theorizing, right? I mean, I mean, this economy of involvement and detachment, we can call it some kind of a reflexive self-distancing, right? Okay, is important and crucial for theorizing. I mean, when you theorize, you cannot but be involved with the object that you're seeking to theorize. But too much involvement with the object can also compromise your ability to abstract from that object. So some distancing is also necessary, and the rules concerning involvement and detachment, I think, depend upon the problem that you're addressing, and there cannot be any kind of clear rules concerning involvement and detachment. And I think whenever I address a theory or a theorist, I'm actually looking for how much is the theory or the theorist involved with the object that they are studying, and how much they are detached from the object, abstracted from the object that they are, and so on, right? So equally in the task of theorizing, not just connecting the dots, not just this reflexive self-distancing, which is a certain economy of involvement and detachment, which is crucial. I think also encountering the tension, right, between the particular and the universal, right? Okay, I mean, reaching beyond particularities. I mean, approximating to something more general and universal is equally critical, right? Etc. So the tension between reaching beyond particularities and recognizing the differences and particularities of people, places, and time is also crucial, right? So in this tension between the universal and the particular, I think again it's a very creative tension for theorizing which is important. And a lot of this theorizing has to engage with some of these debates and underlying questions, and some of it will be taken up in the rest of our course as we proceed and so on. I have a final slide which I think I will postpone for the next class, in the next class I will move into section 2 of the syllabus outline, which is titled "The Interpretive Dimension of the Social Sciences Revisited." But before I move into that, I will make some closing observations, and I don't want to pack them into this class because I want to rehearse this PPT3 and then make some summary pronouncements in the end, and I will do that separately in the beginning of the next class and then move on to the next section. But for the moment, I think the two responses are before you to the traditional scientific conception of theory and theorizing. It may have, this clarification or this lecture may have clarified some of your questions, which you were trying, which may have kind of bobbed up in your heads earlier, but I'm still open to further questions that you might have. And in fact, I would be curious to know if this lecture has, in a sense, answered some of the questions that you were intending to ask. I would still be interested to know, why did the question arise in the first place in your mind, and how you think the ideas that we have discussed in this class answers those questions, whether there is something more in your question that we can be addressing, I think are issues that I want to tackle in the discussion that will now follow. Yeah, that's it. Are there any questions? I think Rauna can. Yes, Nabanita.
Am I audible?
Yes.
So yeah, actually, the question I had in mind after the previous
Come
class.
closer to, a little louder. Suddenly your voice thinned down.
Am I audible now?
Yeah. You be closer to your mic. Yes.
Okay, so the question that came to my mind after listening to the previous lecture has, to some extent, has already been dealt with in today's class. So,
Sure.
but since you told us to share that even after that, so I'm just telling that. So, after going through the previous lecture, I was thinking that when about the Richard Swedberg's argument that context of discovery correspond to the act of theorizing and context of justification relates to theory. So that seems quite problematic to me on the ground that when we talk about that, when we try to uh, distance the context of discovery and context of justification, the argument seems to have a kind of underlying assumption that observation is something that happens in an isolation. Soderbergh's argument seems to go by this assumption that observation happens without, in the absence of concepts and theories. But that may not be the case. So that I was like thinking through that line that how can like we talk about that theorizing precedes theory, while on in actuality it happens so that observation is actually induced by the concepts that we have and also some of the theoretical frameworks that we have in mind.
Correct.
So that was my question. So as you have already like spoke about how like observation is already theory laden,
Right.
and it's driven by the existing conceptual framework. So
Right.
it addresses that question.
Right.
But I still have some confusion regarding when we talk about like one particular aspects of theorization is
No,
conceptual.
Namnita, before you go into the second part, can I just make one critical reminder for you in the light of what you've just said? And
Yes,
you
yes.
outlined the context in which your query arose initially. Can I make
Yes.
one comment?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
See, I think the context of discovery, context of justification distinction can still accommodate, right? Can still accommodate the fact that that in the context of justification, your observations may be theory laden, right?
Yes.
So there is, see what the context of justification is doing is to tell us what are the processes of theory testing, right? Etc. So it argues that it is a logical matter. I mean, at least in the initial articulations, it is a purely logical matter, right? And I mean, your theories may have been induced by, your observations may have been induced by your theories, but do they stand? That's what the context of justification is interested in, right? So the context of justification can recognize the fact that your observations are all theory laden, and yet ask whether it can be sustained or not, right? So I mean this. So see, the ideas that I have discussed in the latter part of my lecture need not be extrapolated into undermining the context of discovery, context of justification distinction, right? Yes, I think we must, what we must challenge about the distinction is this exclusive preoccupation with the context of justification, right? I mean, that when philosophers of science instituted that distinction, they argued that only the context of justification is scientifically pertinent, is important to address. The context of discovery is unimportant. And I think what our discussion has tried to remind us is that the context of discovery can also enter into the context of justification. In fact, that's also something that I've already reminded, before I set up this alternative context of discussion in the earlier class, and so on. But I'm only saying that there is, I mean, somebody who is working with that distinction, context of discovery and context of justification, can still argue that there is something in the context of justification which is still important, right? Despite the fact that the traditional scientific conception of theory and theorizing cannot hold, not just for the sciences, it doesn't definitely hold for the social sciences. But this is a larger critical question, and I will hopefully address this in my last summative comments in the next class. Let me hear you out on the next point.
Yeah, actually, I mean, I understand that point, but what I found problematic in the first place was that when the argument goes by saying that theorization precedes theory, so that seems quite problematic to me. I mean, after going through the articulation by Richard Swedberg. So now, coming to the second point, I was just wondering that when we talk about the process of theorization, one important aspects of the process of theorization is conceptualization. I mean, as a part of theorization, we do engage with the process of conceptualization. So if we go by this argument of distinguishing theory from theorization, we also have to distinguish between concept and conceptualization. So in that case, conceptualization as a process happens, not in absence of concepts, but sometimes driven by concepts. So if that be the case, what's how to negotiate with this kind of dilemma or this confusion? Because if a particular researcher is going to a field with certain conceptual preoccupation, how to tackle the issue in a new light, if already you have certain conceptual preoccupation in mind.
Right. No, okay. I mean, let's not multiply the distinctions. I mean, just because we have a distinction between theory and theorizing, we don't need to make a distinction between concepts and conceptualization. Although I think what you were trying to do was actually an interesting point, right? I mean, but I think it's important that we should not multiply these distinctions beyond a point. Because sometimes, multiplying the distinctions can, constitute a way of evading the central question. But in the light of the new distinction that you made between concepts and conceptualization, I think there is an extremely interesting question that arises between the relationship between theories and concepts. Right? Right? I mean, what is the relationship between theories and concepts? I mean, and there are two viewpoints you can take on this. Okay, I'll first give you both the viewpoints on this, that concepts are internal to theories. That is, any theory has a set of concepts that it works with, right? So concepts are internal to theories. Now, there is an alternative viewpoint, and the alternative viewpoint is the viewpoint that I am a little more sensitized to and have my own inclinations towards, that the relationship between theories and concepts is never internal, right? That concepts are are independent of theories. Although you can have many theories about a concept, right? Now, for instance, you can have look at a concept like religion. I am talking about a concept like religion, right? Now, there are scholars who argue that religion, the concept of religion, is a religious concept, right? So there is a certain theory of Christianity, okay, which is seen as the basis for the concept of religion, right? So that standpoint is arguing that theories, the relationship between theories and concepts is internal, right? I mean, that's an interesting standpoint, and I'm not dismissing that. But equally interesting for me is that you can have different concepts of religion, right? So you may have a Christian concept of religion, you can have a non-Christian concept of religion, so you can have multiple theories of a concept, right? Etc. So I mean, please note, both these standpoints can yield extremely interesting research possibilities, right? Etc. But I mean, there are certain contexts where we have to emphasize that theories and concepts are internal, and there are certain contexts where you may have to argue that the relationship between theories and concepts is never internal. Rather, there can be concepts about which we can have multiple theories, right? Etc. So instead of, in fact, that's why instead of duplicating the theorizing distinction by concepts and conceptualizing distinction, I would actually argue that the more interesting question, which of course is not addressed in the Swedberg essay or in the ambit of the lecture that we are given, but I'm invoking this, that the relationship between theories and concepts is something that we need to address. That's why investing on concepts for me is much more critical than investing on theories, right? Etc. Because many times concepts can free float from theories, right? Etc. And you can actually have multiple theories of a concept, right? The fact that concepts can free float implies that you can have multiple theories of concepts. Furthermore, you can also ask a more interesting question about what the relationship between words and concepts, right? And again, that's an interesting question, right? I mean, the famous Marxist theorist Raymond Williams had a book called Key Words, right? And he was actually talking about key concepts about in the examination of society and culture. That's why he says that this key words is not a dictionary, right? A dictionary has many words. It gives you the meanings of many words. But according to Raymond Williams, his book Key Words, it's not a dictionary, but he calls it a vocabulary, right? So somewhere he argues that key words are key concepts. Now, there is a critical response coming from a historian to him, and where he actually, that is Quentin Skinner, and Quentin Skinner raises some very interesting questions about what is the relationship between words and concepts, and he shifts the problem from vocabularies, from theories, into an assessment of evaluative languages. But I mean, I'm not going to go into that, but that's a fascinating range of discussion. Some of this ground was covered in our seminar that we had the other day on the Raymond Williams centenary, but I'm not sure if many of you attended that, because you all had, surely you would have had classes on that day and so on. But I hope this is clear, Namadita.
Yes, sir. And also, thanks for bringing those issues like concept and the relation between word and concept. And this seems quite interesting to me. Maybe I will explore.
No. The relationship between words and concepts can be very, very fascinating.
Yes.
In fact, I've in some of my recent work, I mean, there is a Keywords for India, a new book which came last year. And I've made an entry on that book on the word Manuvadi, right? The word, I did not choose that word. The editors, one of whom is a very good friend of mine, he chose that word and he told me, you write it and so on. And I found that, I couldn't write a history of that word, because if I have to write a history of the word Manuvadi, I have to be a monumental historian. But I could address the concept of Manuvadi. I could address the larger meaning that underlies that idea of Manuvadi, and I try to address it along those lines. That is true of many words, many other words, right? The word secular, right? I mean, the word and the concept secular. The word, woman and male, words and concepts, purush, the word and the concept. I mean, these are interesting possibilities. I don't know if Raunak is there. Is there any questions from Raunak? I don't know if he's around. Okay, are there any other clarifications?
Sir,
please.
I have one query regarding today's lecture. So in the course of today's lecture, you have talked about double hermeneutic. I mean, saying that the observer is also part of what is being observed. So I'm just wondering whether the very notion of double hermeneutic, it talk about a duality between the observer and the observed, or does it try to or attempts to transgress the dualism? I mean, in course.
No, it does both. I think the idea of a double hermeneutic does both. I mean, the point is, even as we recognize that the observer and the observed, there is a continuity between the observer and the observed. I think there is still an important fact that, look, the status of the observer cannot be confused with the status of the observed, right? So yes, the observer is very much part of the world that he or she observes, right, etc. But there is something in the act of observation that we need to address, right? So I think this double hermeneutic, is important in that it stresses this idea that in the context of the social sciences, the translation between and across languages is always multiple. Whereas in the sciences, the translation is one side. That the observer has to interpret, right, the object, right? And the observer is interpreting the object through the theories, the paradigms that he or she works with. So there is some translation that he or she is seeking to do. in the context of the social sciences, there is more complications in that process, right? Please note, that's why, I mean, I think it's one thing to speak about observer and observed and speak about it as a duality. And I think, I mean, it's one thing to speak of this as a dichotomy. It's another to speak of it as a duality. As a duality, I think there is something in that process which makes the relationship between the observer and the observed more complicated, right? And the double hermeneutic is one suggestion about the complications that are underlying the observer-observed relationship. And I did not speak much about it in the course of my lecture, because in the second theme, in the first segment of the second theme, when I enter into Charles Taylor and hermeneutics, I will be dealing with some of these questions a lot more fully in the coming classes. That's the reason why I kind of didn't detail it as much as I could have.
Okay, and actually, since you mentioned about the feminist response, and also you named quite a few feminist thinkers, for example, Karen Barrett's. So I'm just thinking about Karen Barrett's concept of interaction, and if I like apply that in the context of this observation as double hermeneutic, it seems that like the Karen Barrett's concept of interaction says that there is no a priori things in themselves, but rather it's a kind of unfolding process. So
Sure.
I'm just thinking that
No, that's okay. I mean, I mean, there is nothing. I mean, there is. I mean, there is not. See, let's not go overboard, Nabanita. Don't go overboard by these conceptions, right? And surely the kind of orientations that come from Karen Barad you'll also have to engage with the limits of that conception, right? So I think it's important that we don't go overboard with our borrowed conceptions. And then I think it's important to get a measure. I mean, as I said, a measure of involvement and detachment. Be involved with Karen Barad, but also be detached from Karen Barad. Okay. I mean, how much to be involved, how to be involved, okay, when to be detached, how to be detached, I think are critical questions which we can only shape up in the course of our own engagements. And scholarship is a solitary exercise. And I think the measure of involvement and detachment will I mean, we may have methodology classes, we may have knowing the social world classes. Ultimately, it is your measure that will rule, and you will be subjected to scrutiny in the critical community of scholars and so on, right? Okay. Any other questions? Right. So that's it then. So let me stop the recording. I will have some closing comments in the next class, and then move on to the next segment of the course. Right.
sir, you are muted.